This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for this program is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
And thanks for joining us for Newsmakers here on WKNO. I am Local 24's Richard Ransom in a different studio today because we're going to talk about something very unique. Normally this program on WKNO focuses on politicians. Well, today I have kind of the uncomfortable position of interviewing fellow journalists who I have a lot of esteem and respect for. Let's go ahead and introduce you because they are heading up a brand new journalistic effort in Memphis called the Daily Memphian, and there's been a lot of talk about it, and now the general public is starting to hear about this and has lots of questions, and hopefully we'll be able to ask some of those questions for you and get them answered. Let's start by introducing our guest. Eric Barnes is the president and executive editor of this new venture. Of course, people are familiar with you, Eric, because of Behind the Headlines, which you host here on WKNO, as well as this show, Newsmakers. We also have Jennifer Biggs, who is the food and dining editor for the Daily Memphian. Thank you for being here. Oda Sanford, a familiar face to me, a political columnist and editor at large for the Daily Memphian, and a name everybody knows, Jeff Calkins, who will be columnist for this new effort. So let's start with you, Eric, since I know you've been kind of busy lately trying to get this thing going. For people who are just now kind of on the periphery and they don't know the ins and outs of this like you do, explain how this is different than the typical. I mean, this is an era where the media landscape is changing almost by the hour, it seems. How is this effort different?
Well, I think in some ways it's not. It's a return to certain roots of printed journalism. It's an online-only news source, but the tradition and the whole basis is around printed journalism. And we will produce 10 to 20 articles a day, 7 days a week about Memphis. We'll have this staff, a newsroom in the low 20s as of launch, and hopefully that will even continue to grow. And it will be written journalism, and it will be presented in a format that's pretty simple to read on your desktop, on your phone, however you read news online. But then we'll also add podcasts, we'll have video, we'll have produced segments about, given maybe a profile of a business or a politician or a political issue. We'll have live stream sort of things from Facebook and other kind of live stream sources. So it'll be this hybrid of traditional news and the foundations of print journalism combined with some of the new technologies and the new ways of accessing news online. But you are not going to go to a printing press. People want to know, is there going to be a newspaper to hold in my hands? The answer is no to that. And you are a nonprofit venture, which in the media landscape is also something we never hear about either. So talk about both of those issues. The lack of print was was basically resources. We went back and forth on print. Print is an incredible delivery mechanism. I'm not one who thinks that print is dead. There are lots of great uses for print. But it is a difficult business model, and it's an incredibly expensive one. To produce a print paper every day, to distribute at a time when a lot of the traditional advertising sources have dried up, classifieds and certain types of department store ads and so on, it just makes for a really difficult business model. And we decided, let's go ahead and put the money into more people and more resources in the online-only endeavor. In terms of being a nonprofit, there's an association of a lot of the nonprofit news sources. I think they have 150 members. There are other ones who aren't members. And it's a kind of growing trend where the model of local news, particularly metro newspapers, is really difficult given all the changes, given certain mistakes metro papers made, and given a landscape of advertising and subscription dollars. It's just being so difficult. And so a nonprofit can be a lot of things. Some nonprofits are hand-to-mouth, raising money every day, every week to stay afloat. Others are very sustainable. Hospitals, for instance, locally, most of them are nonprofits, but of course are incredibly sustainable and revenue generating. We look to be a very sustainable nonprofit. We're going to have a paywall, subscription-based website. We'll sell advertising, sponsorships, but it means that we don't have to worry about a constant return on an investment to people who put up money. And what we've seen in a lot of papers, for-profit papers, big metro papers of this scale, when they don't hit the profit margins, when Wall Street isn't happy, when private investors aren't happy, they cut people and they cut paper and they cut distribution, and it becomes a downward spiral. So while we have a lot of financial pressure to be sustainable as a nonprofit, we can, whatever resources we're able to generate, we can put back into the people and to the content we do.
Switch to you, Otis. You're the longtime Memphian here of all of us at this table and have been reporting on this community the longest period of time. Mm-hmm. Any trepidation when you decided to make this move and leave your columnist job with the Commercial Appeal, a newspaper you had been with for so long? Right. And what are your thoughts on how the community will receive this effort?
Well, I'd be lying if I'd say there was absolutely no trepidation. I've been associated with the paper off and on since the early 1970s. That's a long time. But when I look at as Eric was talking about, the landscape of news these days, the landscape of news delivery, the opportunity to be in on the ground floor of something that I believe can be and should be and will be successful just because of the quality of the staff that's being assembled. I didn't really have much hesitancy in doing this. Plus, my role is, in addition to being a columnist and an editor at large, which basically means I'll be a consultant for the other editors at the Daily Memphian. My full-time job is teaching journalism and holding the chair of excellence in journalism at the University of Memphis. And as such, we are starting an Institute for Public Service Reporting to do the kinds of investigative work, public service work that is not being done to a grand scale right now anywhere in Memphis just because of budget cuts and a lot of other constraints. And that institute is going to partner with the Daily Memphian. Daily Memphian will be the mechanism for those stories to be published. Mark Pereskia, who's an outstanding investigative reporter, is going to be heading up that, and I'll be working with him not hands-on, but in an advisory role. And so there was a lot of synergy here that made it sensible for me to take my column, which has been now 11 years, and move it to the Daily Memphian, and I don't think I'm going to lose much readership at all there.
Jeff, to you next. When you and Jennifer both, when that became public that you two were leaving the Commercial Appeal, I think that's when the public at large started to take notice about, wow, what's going on here, and people have bemoaned to me privately, and I'm sure you've heard the same thing, the decline of the newspaper, the Commercial Appeal that you all were a part of for years and years. If I could ask the same question of you, any trepidation you may have had about leaving a newspaper where you made your mark and had such a following, and just what you hope to do differently, if anything, in your approach with this new venture with the Memphian?
Yeah, I had enormous trepidation. I remember I was speaking at a club the night that I'd made up my mind to go, and I was talking, and I hadn't announced the news yet, but I told this, it was Grace St. Luke's, it was a church group, and I told them that I was no longer going to be the columnist of the Commercial Appeal, and I started crying because it means, and I think Otis can relate to that. It has meant, yeah, it's been my dream job for the last 22 years to be part of this city and part of the community and writing about it. And when I came here, I thought it was a civic treasure, that newspaper, and I'm not going to pile on, but I think people understand what it's become, and some of that's because of the nature of the newspaper business. Mm-hmm. Some of it's because the decisions have been made almost exclusively from outside of Memphis, and so it's the old Ronald Reagan slang. He didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left him, and that's how I sort of feel about the Commercial Appeal. I did not leave the newspaper that I had loved so long. It was gone by the time I left, and so what I hope to do is help create. First of all, I love the fact that it's by Memphians, for Memphians, about Memphis. We do have a chip on our shoulders, our community, and we understand how unique this community is, and I think that's sort of what inspires this effort, is that we know we need quality journalism in this community. And then honestly, broadly, without being too highfalutin about it, there is no local model that works right now. There's no local model that works right now. And if we can get a local model where you combine the philanthropy and then the paywall and the quality and the nonprofit model, I do think it could be the start of something that could even extend beyond Memphis. I do believe that if we're successful, lots of folks are going to take notice. So it's a chance for me. I would have loved to have kept writing for the newspaper that existed 15 years ago. That would have been my dream. It doesn't. And so now I'm trying to build something else that I hope could be sustainable for the next 100 years.
although, as we know with some recent hires, the Commercial Appeal has stepped up its game and has made it known it's not going to go away quietly, despite the fact that so many staffers have left the Commercial Appeal to, as you have, to be a part of this new venture. How do you view the Commercial Appeal as a competitor, Jennifer? And I also want you to answer a question about your role as the editor for Foodies, because we know Memphis has some wonderful choices there. How you hope to change that role here?
Anybody who thinks they are your competition is your competition. So yes, they are. Everybody who is writing about my beat is my competition. That doesn't mean I don't welcome that, and sometimes, you know, I'll win, sometimes somebody else will. That's just how it goes. I am going to do pretty much what I was doing at the Commercial Appeal. I did it for so long. I grew up reading the Commercial Appeal, read it every day. I mean, I remember reading dining reviews back when Chris Gang was writing dining reviews, and Anna Burr. Do you remember that? I mean, you know, under $10. So it was a different day back then. And I loved that paper, loved it. We were always a Commercial Appeal family. That said, I did not leave with trepidation. It happened very quickly for me, because as soon as I talked to Eric and James and they told me what was happening, I was just like,
where do I sign?
I'm pretty, I mean, I didn't, you know, just say I'm ready, but I was ready.
You didn't tell us that.
No.
You actually played, well, I'm going to have to think about this. So there's a little revisionist history here.
We know. No, I jumped right in that very moment. I was ready to do it. I was excited about it. What I intend to do, I'm going to keep a lot of the things I did, but one thing I want to do a little bit differently with food coverage is I want to get more into the people who are behind, not just the restaurants, but behind Memphis cooking, and getting it where it is today. People that you have heard of, but you don't really know what they're about. Jim Neely's story. We know about how, you know, barbecue, but you don't know that Jim Neely is one of the most interesting people I've ever met in my life, and how all over the world, where he's been, what he's done. I want to be able to talk about that. I want to be able to chronicle these people. What brought Kelly? Why is Kelly English in Memphis instead of in New Orleans? I mean, there are stories behind all of this, and we'll have more room for all that. So I intend to do a little bit more long form, bringing you the story behind the people who bring you the food on your table.
As you all look at this, and I'll start with you, Eric, on this one, and we're already halfway through, hard to believe, but what do you see as your biggest challenge as you approach this? When I look at it, and I look at the challenge that we all face, and that is the younger generation seems less and less interested in being informed. They kind of trust that they're going to get it on their Twitter feed or what have you. I see that with my kids. I try to convince them journalism is important, and I think they kind of get that, but it's interesting to me how they get their information now. And we're in a community that struggles with poverty and literacy, and it seems like a lot of the other nonprofit ventures are in Austin, Texas, which doesn't really have that problem so much, or in Colorado, or in Oregon. Washington Post and New York Times are kind of almost not fair to compare. So how do you see that particular issue as a challenge?
I think in terms of poverty, we've got to bridge digital divide, and we've got to find ways that we reach everyone where they are. And so we will, as we get closer to launching, and then after we launch, we will have programs. I mean, the simplest thing I'm 99% sure we'll have free access for everyone in the libraries, but then we'll expand that to other entities. We'll try to work with schools. We'll try to get to people where they are, and so that there's free access for people who can't afford full access. We'll have programs where you could sponsor other subscribers, so you can add onto your subscription and pay for someone else's. So I think there are a whole lot of ways that we will try to get there, and but it's a challenge. I mean, and it's, you know, to some degree that's not new. You know, the newspaper was expensive. I mean, print newspapers were expensive. There was always a certain divide in terms of access to good local content. I think in terms of the first question of what are the biggest challenges for us, or I don't know how you asked, maybe what I most worry about. You know, sometimes I worry a little bit about expectations. People have been so excited. People have been so thrilled about the prospect of this coming, and I kind of have jokes about, you know, it doesn't dance, it doesn't spin, it's not going to change. It's just a really high quality news source. Like, you know, the expectations are way up here. Let's kind of bring them down here maybe. And then we just have to hit our numbers. We are, one of the risks of saying, well, we came out and very purposely said, you are a nonprofit, and we raised a lot of money, $6.5 million plus to start. I worry that people will think that means we have a blank check to do anything and, oh, they've got all the money they need. It's expensive to produce online local news every day. People who work for the Daily Memphian are not volunteering their time, and they shouldn't. It's a profession, and they should be paid well for what they do. And for most of our history in the United States, news cost money. You had to pay for it, a nickel or a dime or a penny or, you know, $10 or $300, whatever it was for your paper or your subscription. So I hope that people understand that there's, although we've raised a lot of money to get started, it's very expensive to do this. And they're going to need to pay to read our news if they are able. Again, there'll be these exceptions and these programs for people so that we can get them to senior citizens and people who just aren't as well off.
As we all know, you're not going to get rich, chances are, being in journalism per se. But Otis, one criticism I have heard is just the lack of minority representation with the Daily Memphian. Somewhere around 20%, is that fair, Eric?
20 to 25, yeah.
So, you know, obviously significantly less than what the community is per se. I want to get your feelings about that, and does that bother you?
Well, obviously, you would love to have, and you would love to follow the model and the recommendation going all the way back to the Kerner Commission back in the late 60s of having a staff of news people that reflects your community. But the fact is, I don't know of any news organization in this city, especially print news, that has ever reached that goal or even come close. It is an issue. It is an issue that a lot of people are talking about. I think we've talked about it in the respective news meetings that we've had with the Daily Memphian. I certainly have that as a concern coming from the university setting, where we actually in the journalism department do quite well. I mean, our minority population among the students is high 30s into the 40s. And so I think that is an area where we will be able to assist the Daily Memphian, primarily because in my role as editor-at-large, I will be consulting with Eric and with James Overstreet, who will be the editor, in identifying young talent, especially interns, who can come into the Daily Memphian and help. I've already mentioned the Institute of Public Service Journalism. We expect to have graduate students who will be working with that venture, and we certainly plan and will make that very diverse. But the short answer to your question is yes, that's always a concern. Journalism, the diversity of journalism is a concern everywhere. And I think that not just in Memphis, but everywhere I've ever worked, and I've worked at 4 major markets, it's always been a concern and an issue that we've tried to address. I think we are addressing that at the university. I see the Daily Memphian doing the same thing.
How avoid any kind of tag as being too elitist? I mean, all of us sitting at this table are known in a lot of different circles, and if you're going to reach the family in North Memphis or South Memphis or East Memphis or wherever, where they're just trying to get by with two incomes and keep the kids going to school, what have you, that you not turn off the person who may not be the daily news consumer. Do you have any concern about that, Jeff?
You know, I mean, I think what Eric said is exactly right. That some of this goes to the digital divide, and we have to figure out ways of bridging that, and making sure we're in schools, and making sure we're at libraries, and making. So yeah, having said that, I also think, like, I sort of like writing about everyman. Like, I mean, that's sort of what I've really. I write about Penny Hardaway and famous people and whatever else, but the stories that I've liked the most are stories about the people of Memphis. And the truth of the matter is, I think that's what this is about as much as anything, is focusing on Memphis by people who live in Memphis, who understand Memphis, who care deeply about Memphis. And so I'm going to write about people and all sorts of people. And so I honestly don't think of the way I write or the way I think about this as elitist at all. I sort of go back to, the guy in a cup of coffee and a nickel newspaper, and sort of that's how I try to address my job. And the fact is that for $7 a month, that's less than, it's $7 a month, but there are lots of people who spend $7 on a cup of coffee these days. Now, I'm not saying that, but it is not a price that's set at some astronomical price.
And well, it's cheaper than Netflix.
Yeah, that's the thing. How many people just automatically pay for, without thinking, pay for Netflix, and yet they want their print journalism for free? Yeah. And so I don't think $7 is think of what people pay for their phones and their cable and their $7. I actually think is purposefully priced at a place where a lot of people can reach it.
You want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, no, just what Jeff said. I mean, that was a part of the whole strategy. I mean, I sat around with some people and said, what would you pay for it? And they said, wait, $19 a month. And I think there are people who would pay $20 to $30 a month for the quality of journalism these guys are going to produce. But we very purposely said, no, we will fail if we're an elitist audience, if we're only reaching the middle and upper middle class. We have to get as close as we can to reaching everyone.
And we didn't want all that tiered pricing either. I know that was talked about, just one flat price, and that is affordable for most people. And you know, with food, I don't feel, I love what I'm always looking for when I'm out reviewing. I'm looking for little restaurants that nobody knows about, and these are in neighborhoods. I'll get into North Memphis, South Memphis a lot because I'm looking for little gems, little soul food places, little barbecue places that not everybody knows about. So I think that just doing that gets into the community. But there's also a lot of programs that are going on in these communities, and we'll have also at Madeline with High Ground is going to be helping us, and that you get into North Memphis, and you have the Ed Rice Community Center, which has a fantastic food program. Caritas Village, that's something we'll be writing about. There are coverage will extend. It's not just fine dining and people in fancy kitchens. There's going to be a lot more.
And let me add to that. Especially for the three of us, there's really nothing elitist about the things that we're probably going to be focusing on the most. There's really nothing elitist about sports in this town. Everybody cares about basketball and football in this community. Everybody cares about having a good meal and understanding where to go get it. Everybody understands and pays attention to politics in this community, as we saw in the last election a couple of weeks ago. So I think where we're concerned, we're not trying to do anything highbrow. I think Jeff is right. We're looking for the every person out there who can connect with the kinds of stories that we've been doing all of our lives. I mean, we have a combined, I don't want to tell you how many number of years we have combined.
No, we don't know that.
We don't want to know that. So there's, we're not even thinking about anything that's highbrow. We're thinking about Memphis, Memphians, and what affects and impacts them in every standpoint, in every way of life.
All right, some major things I'll make sure we address before our time runs out here. Yes, this is a digital media online newspaper, but you are going to be doing video. Talk about that briefly.
Yeah, we'll do everything from, there's an event, the mayor is announcing something or some sort of project, or one of the things they were talking about, we could Facebook Live it and have it live streamed pretty simply. People seem to really like that. Two, at the higher end, we can do produced pieces. So when the Riverfront Development Corporation, or whatever they're called now, announces new plans, we can fly a drone over and get some video, and we can tie in renderings and interviews with people involved and have a kind of 2 or 3 minute nice produced piece. Business profiles, we've already started doing some of those that are really nice produced pieces. It's amazing how the high quality video you can do now pretty quickly online.
Will there be obituaries?
There will eventually be obituaries. Whether or not we launch with them, I don't know. And that launch, I should say about launch, as I think this is airing in August, late August, we're looking for a September launch, late September, worst case October. Will we have obits then? I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of sensitivities to that, and you got to do that right. We certainly will cover, prominent people who passed away, a former governor, a former mayor, something like that. We'll do.
Also, lots of talk about how this whole thing is structured. There's been some negativity about a lack of transparency and a resistance to reveal who all the investors are in this effort. Your reason has been there's an agreement that those investors will not weigh in on the online product and the journalism that takes place there. I want to ask the journalists around the table really quick, does it bother you?
I'd like to weigh in this, because the first thing I heard was, when I was being approached by this, I was like, okay, who's giving the money? And they said, we're not going to tell you. And I said, well, then I'm not going to do it. And that was my view until I heard you call them investors. They're not investors, they're not owners, they're donors. In the same way that NPR has donors or whatever else has donors, they've given money, said do with it what you will, no strings attached. They've simply donated money. They're anonymous donors, like people are anonymous donors to a lot of things. If I thought there were some secret people out there pulling strings, I wouldn't be involved.
But if that anonymous donor
But-
has a business interest that does not like your coverage,
don't know
you're not
who
concerned about
well,
that.
they have no. They gave the money. Like if an anonymous donor gives it to NPR and moves on and whatever, I don't have any. There's no continuing relationship. They literally have no relationship with the continuing enterprise. They gave the money. It's in a bank, and I don't know who they are to begin with.
Okay.
So it did bother. It did. If there were anonymous owners, that would bother me. If there's people who gave money, no strings attached, it actually won't influence I can't imagine how it could influence me.
But the same thing. When I was told no strings, I thought, well, then what does it matter? If it's truly no strings attached, they have nothing to say, it doesn't matter. But I would also say that anybody who thinks that just because you work in a newspaper that may be owned by corporate people, that there aren't people telling you what has to happen, that happens every day. There are people pulling strings everywhere. I think that here we'll be a little bit more free of that. It's the way I feel about it. I don't feel like I'm going to be told to go write about some fancy dinner at some restaurant that happens to be somebody's favorite
We're in a
place.
familiar spot where I get to tell you we have 50 seconds left.
Okay, and
So-
very briefly, let me add to this. I worked for Scripps for most of my career full time. Scripps became a public company in the late 1980s. They had investors. I had no idea who they were. And I left there. I didn't know who they were. So I didn't really care who they were. I was just doing my job, either as a reporter or as an editor. And so, I mean, I don't know who these donors are, but I don't think that it doesn't bother me, and it's not going to change the way I'm going to do my job.
More people want to give money, by the way, anonymous donors. We would take it, wouldn't we? I mean, if more people anonymously want to donate money,
It's controlled by the independent board of directors, which is fully transparent, and those are public people, and they control the money.
All right, very good. Well, I wish all of you the best of luck. Great to have a new journalistic venture here in the city, and not too much luck. But I want you to have a lot of success, and we'll be watching. You're looking for a launch once again in September or maybe early October.
Yes.
All right, very good. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks,
We'll see you next time here on Newsmakers.
Thank you.